Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Roleplay Chat. I'm Matt, a game master who cannot stop talking about role playing games. And today we're going to be talking all about running stories, telling stories in Ravenloft, Barovia, the Plane of Darkness, Strahd's world. So we're going to be talking all about that. And I'm joined by a gamer, an author, an all around geek and nerd, and the author of Ravenloft, Heir of Strahd, Delilah S. Dawson. Welcome,
Hi,
Delilah, to
thank you so
Roleplay
much.
Chat.
And you're so much more welcoming than Strahd is.
Yeah, I would hope so. I don't think that's too high a bar, but I'll take the compliment anyway. I appreciate it. So Delilah, I'm really excited to have you here on the show to talk to us about your new book that's coming out soon, and also just to kind of give your insights and advice as it pertains to telling stories in Ravenloft. I think it's probably the most popular, if not one of the most popular D&D campaign like adventure modules that exists. The Curse of Strahd is very very popular. I've never played it. I'm trying to get someone else to run it for me so that I don't spoil it for myself. But it's really an atmosphere and mood that I really enjoy. So anyway, thank you for being here. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. Before we get started, why don't you take the mic, let the listeners know a little bit about kind of your geek origin story, if you would, to let us know about what kind of things you like to do in the nerd space.
Oh yeah, that's my whole life. Like y'all can't see it, but my bookshelf behind me is just nothing but Star Wars and My Little Pony and everything. So I was born in the time of you couldn't watch a movie unless you went to the theater and saw it. So my first kind of taste of things was when the Ewoks became a cultural thing. I was able to my first time staying up late was to see the Ewoks battle for Endor, and I was like, "Oh my god, like it's about a little girl who crash lands on a planet and becomes a hero with a bunch of murder bears. Like, what's not to love?" So Star Wars was kind of my first real big thing that I was into where I had like, the color forms and my Ewok toys and like the little books where R2-D2 would go and you turn the page. But
Awesome.
also, back then we didn't really have like a clear delineation. Like, you know, we watched Jaws and Piranha, but there was no such thing as like, you know, the horror community back then, in our little suburb of North Atlanta. So I loved things. Like I was super into The Last Unicorn, and then The Labyrinth came out and was like the movie that uh awakened me as a human being pretty much. And
Awesome.
we had just so many strange. The Kroll came out and Legend came out, and that was those were my favorite movies. Were the ones that you know had this magical world and heroes and dark villains and that sort of thing. So I was kind of into things before there was a name for it. I do remember in high school dating a boy who was like, I work at a comic book shop and I'll take you in there, but like, don't embarrass me because comics aren't for girls.
Oh
I was
boy.
like, oh, I'm going to go to my role playing group. And I was like, can I come with you? And he was like, no, this isn't for girls. So it's like one of my first introduction to this world is being told it wasn't for me when I was like, but I've been reading this monster manual for so long. I'd be so valuable. And they were like,
Yeah,
no.
definitely. Definitely.
Um,
That's a shame. I'm sorry that that was your introduction to kind of the
The
D&D
saddest thing is he
community, but
died before I made all of the before I started, like, writing Star Wars and Dungeons& and Dragons, like, I wish he was alive so I could be like, "You know what? It is for me."
well, hey, it's a shame that he didn't get to see all the cool stuff that you've been involved in, but
Started out pretty
definitely.
dark, but, that's my brand, so that's why Ravenloft. Because when they were like, "Who writes horror and whimsy?" That's my Venn diagram.
Yeah, yeah, well, definitely. I mean, Ravenloft is such a cool space. I've always been kind of, I don't know if intimidated is the right word, but like in a positive way by Ravenloft and Innistrad and these dark, gloomy spaces. I've only really started dabbling in horror tabletop role playing games recently, and it's something that really, I mean, recently. Now I'm gonna date myself. I feel like the past 3 or 4 years now I've been playing horror tabletop role playing games, but it's really, really a fun space to kind of explore. And I can only imagine it being difficult when you're using an existing IP. So I'd love to kind of pick your brain and learn a little bit about the challenges and the obstacles perhaps that came with using a space that exists already. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Why don't we start by talking about your new book? So given that you
Yes.
have a new book that's coming out, I take it that you like and enjoy the setting of Ravenloft. So I'd love to hear about what it is about that setting that you like and kind of how that evolved into telling and writing a story about Ravenloft.
Well, Ravenloft isn't just one world, it is a whole bunch of worlds. It's like, a giant swamp with all of these little islands in them, and each island is its own world. And so pretty much every horror movie or franchise or realm that you like, Dracula, vampires, werewolves, aliens, elder gods, like there is a world already created for you with some animals and villains already created for you. So you can find that world. And then if you want to create yet your own world in the domains of dread, you can. So it's just really malleable and fun, and you can decide on the scale of how, if you want it to be, like a jump scare world or a kind of creeping gothic horror scare world, or a more like science minded steampunky or Frankenstein world. So there's just a lot of choices in there, for game masters, and then characters playing the game, have every single thing available in the entire Dungeons and Dragons pantheon. You can be any character you want because people randomly show up in Ravenloft. So you can, basically there's just so many options for
Mhm.
that. And then there's also the in-world kind of characters you can use as well. So there's just a wide range of choices there, and the sky's the limit.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And as far as your upcoming book, could you give us kind of like an elevator without spoiling anything, a kind of an elevator pitch of what people can expect if they pick up your novel, Ravenloft, Heir of Strahd?
Yeah, so we've got five random strangers from Faerun, uh, people who have secrets, people and they're pretty much young adults age, they're all like probably early 20s-ish or thereabouts, except for the drow who's older but is an idiot, so it doesn't matter. But they all awaken together in a misty forest. They don't know who each other is, they don't know why they're there or how they got there or why. And then suddenly if they have found themselves in Strahd's realm, Barovia, where, things kind of start to go wrong for characters who may not know what they're up against. In the same way that when you're watching a horror movie, a big part of the fear is that like we the audience know what's happening, but the characters don't know what's happening. They don't know what genre
Mhm.
they're in. It's a lot like that too, where it takes them a while to figure out what's going on in the rules of this new world.
Yeah, awesome. That
They are.
that does sound a lot of fun.
But, they're unlikely heroes, so they start out at like a level 2, which is not a great place to be in a fight with four strangers, and each person is defensive and suspicious and just out to stay alive.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. From what stories I've been told about playing in games of Curse of Strahd, that doesn't sound too dissimilar to that, right? Uh, Playing in the House of Horror, for instance, starting things off, it's
Well, the book
known
is
to be a
meant
very
to sorry.
go
Yeah, the
ahead.
book is meant to feel like a campaign you're playing with your friends.
Awesome.
And it's also meant to be a gateway for new fans. So if you have a person who's never read a D&D book, who's never played a game, maybe they saw Honor Among Thieves and were like, "Oh, this is cool. What's up?" Um, then this book can be an open gateway for them. It kind of explains everything as you go along, not in a, like, well, actually, Bob, what a point score, what XP means is blah, but as in, you're a character learning in real time because these characters don't know what's going on either. So it's meant to be a gateway for new fans, whereas people who are already, very knowledgeable in this world will see a lot of familiar things. I didn't change the world. It's like Strahd isn't suddenly a sexy Twilight vampire, like he remains Strahd. So, longtime fans are going to see the world that they know and love, and hopefully, a few fun twists and things in there. But it's meant to run like a game. These characters
Yeah,
all
that's
have
awesome.
character sheets, they all have stats. I rolled for some stuff. The dice hate me. Um, But yeah,
That's
it's
so
it's
cool.
playable.
So you made the characters not only their personality and stuff, but you actually went out and created character sheets for every all of the characters in your book?
Yeah, they have character sheets, they have their spell lists, they have their weaponry on them and that sort of thing. But yeah, every one of them
It's
is
fun.
a playable character.
Have you played? Like, with a group of people? Have you played the book characters in, like, in an encounter or something?
No, but that would be really fun to do, like, on a panel at a con or something.
Yeah,
Just be
you
like, "Here's your character
100%
sheet,
need to
let's
do that.
go."
That would be really, really fun, just to kinda see how it all kind of pans out, you know? That'd be
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, definitely. Um, so going back to Ravenloft and Barovia and kind of and Strahd for that matter, this is a world that's been in the D&D universe for a long time. I think from what I can understand is very well loved. People really love the adventure, the module, the world, the kind of the twists and turns along the way, and the characters that exist already in that space. Strahd being one of them. He's kind of one of these villains that everybody kind of looks up to as being this perfect, not perfect, but this wonderful example of what like the big bad can be at the end of a kind of adventure. I'd love to hear a little bit about how those existing characters influenced or maybe kind of like how you had to weave around those kind of
Uh,
like canonical elements of the world when writing your story.
well, when writing this book, I had my Ravenloft book, and I had my Curse of Strahd book, and I had my Taroka cards, and I had my big unfolding map of Castle Ravenloft.
Awesome.
So, like, it's very much you can track it through the castle. Like it's very one to one to the existing maps and to some of the creatures and denizens of the castle. There's some new things too, but there are things we know. Like we know that Strahd has like his ex-wives hanging around. We know that
Mhm.
there's a room that used to belong to Jander Sunstar. We know, um, which kind of little creatures and that there are witches. They're just Barovian witches hanging around, ready to do naughty things. So I did have to, like, shoehorn in a couple of guest rooms because when you do look at the actual map, you're like, "Dude, where do people sleep?" Jander
Yeah.
has a room and Strahd has a room, and it's like, those are the only beds, so I did have to be like, "Oh, yeah, on that maybe there's 2 rooms in there, like, we have to give you some room somewhere." But for the most part, it is very playable within the castle. Um, and it's also, anytime you get to a point when you're in the book and you're like, "Okay, I need something to happen," you just start turning the pages and being like, "Oh, yep, there it is. That thing already exists. I'm gonna use that."
Cool.
So yeah, it's so fun because there's so much that exists, but it's also because there's no one way to play the game. You can take
Mhm.
what's there, you can mix it up, you can move people around because most of the characters move around the castle. Um, but, it's like the heart is there, the well, like the crypts are there, and it's even as the characters are moving through the castle, the things that are in the castle that would step you up, like that trapdoor, still there. That magic spell that scoots you back to the other side, still there. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's all in
that's
there.
cool. That's really awesome. And I think you're really onto something, right? These games are so much fun to play because they allow for this flexibility to mold the game into what kind of story the party wants and what the game master is kind of like suitable for what's at hand in the game. So kind of that balance makes it, I think, a really ripe thing to tell a story about. So that sounds really fun that you kind of were able to tap into, some of the things that people can expect, but then also kind of throw your own twists and make your own modifications to kind of suit the story that you're telling.
But it's
Um,
also in this world, there's a lot of scary things, and there's also things that are just ridiculous in the same way that, any game in D&D, like a gelatinous cube, like we're supposed to be scared of this. And then you find it and you're like, "Oh god, I am scared." So there are
totally.
moments during the book that are kind of ridiculous because when you look at what's happening to these characters in this world and the rules of the world, you're like, "This is crazy." And you
Yeah,
might
for
almost die, but it's still just crazy. There's another one of the domains of dread is in the book. I won't spoil it for you, but things get very weird.
sure. Yeah, well, that is a really interesting part about about the plane of Ravenloft, isn't it? That there's kind of these subplanes that exist within it. And there's a lot of potential to kind of jump around. Is that something that happens in your book where the characters are kind of like plane jumping between the different
Well, longtime fans will recognize that there are certain characters who are able to move through the mists in certain ways, and so those characters can act as guides, and one of them does show up to help the
cool.
characters move between two of the domains. So we
That's
do
fun.
have some interludes in the mist.
Very neat. Very neat. Okay, I we won't go further. We don't want to spoil anything. But that's great. That's awesome. Um, Another question I had for you too, because we talked a little bit about, the horror genre and the scary, spooky, scary, and how that kind of influenced your trajectory, as it were, in the nerd space. Ravenloft does kind of provide this blank slate for like the type of horror, right, that can be presented in a narrative. If a table of players want it to be kind of like a spooky Tim Burton vibe, I'm sure that can happen. Same with like some really intense cosmic horror or gothic horror or whatever. There's the whole spectrum of horror can be presented. I'd love to. This is kind of a two-parter. I'd love to know, when you're telling stories, when you're playing games and stuff like that, where do you usually like to be in that spectrum? And then does that translate into the book, and where does the book live on kind of the spectrum of horror, if you would?
So I write horror for adults, and then I write horror for middle grade. So my middle grade usually revolves around ghosts. So it's, very we are in a space that is haunted and it is very frightening and I'm questioning my sanity and I can't trust the adults to help me. It's very
Hmm.
kind of serious, scary stuff. Um, and then my adult works kind of range from, I've got like a billionaire murder island kind of slasher book, and then I've got a kind of female Hannibal retelling that's like a sapphic love story that goes very dark. And then I've got um, a kind of haunted artist retreat on the grounds of an old asylum. So I guess I probably lean more into the we are in a place that is haunted from someone who suffered something pretty terrible. And oh
Mm,
no, people are dying. And also
okay.
kind of eat the rich.
Yeah, yeah. So Strahd, right? Kind of,
Yeah,
to a certain
I
degree.
mean, he's the we the ghosts aren't the scary thing in Ravenloft, and the
Yeah.
characters, what contributes to a ghost story is usually a very serious contemporary character who is having some kind of trauma or problem, that the
Mm,
ghost plays into. And this is not an we didn't want an issues book, we wanted a fun adventure book. So we don't have so much that, feeling of I am alone in this and I am being haunted and I'm also traumatized. We have these you know, 5 idiots in a castle going like, they try to leave and then like, "You can't leave Castle Ravenloft, there are reasons."
mhm,
So
mhm.
I don't know if I've written, another story that merges, adventure in this way with horror. Usually
Okay,
more
so this would kind
personal
of
story.
be, yeah. So this is more kind of like uncharted territory for you, writing
Yeah.
something of this nature.
I mean,
Awesome.
it's
How did you
uncharted in
find it?
that combining those 2 things I've written, plenty of kind of adventures. I wrote the Tales of Hell with
Yeah.
Kevin Hearn, which is kind of fantasy satire, but I love the, we a group of people have to go on this journey. Like, I enjoy doing journey books. My Wake of Vultures series that I wrote under Lila Bowen is like Weird West. We have to go on the riding our horses across 1850s Texas. So, I just have never merged them together. It's like I love chocolate and I love peanut butter, and then suddenly I put them together and was like, "Oh, there it is."
Yeah, yeah. How did you find, like, did you find it something that you enjoyed doing that you would do again?
I would keep writing books like this all the time. It was so much fun, and the folks at Wizards of the Coast were just an absolute delight to work with. It's like we were vibing so hard, and they liked what I wanted to
Awesome.
do, and I liked what they had to say about, and it was a delight working with them. So yeah, I would totally write more things like this.
Awesome. That's great. Speaking of Wizards of the Coast, I'd love to know, especially given the, the ownership that they have in kind of like this world and the existing canonical elements. What kind of support, what kind of tools, if any, did they kind of provide you in facilitating the story being told in this, beloved space in Ravenloft?
Well, they gave me, full access to D&D Beyond,
Cool.
which is pretty cool, like, having universal access to that is, makes you feel vaguely like a god. You could just do anything you want to. But I am at my heart kind of a pencil and paper girl, so, like, my character sheets, I printed out the blank ones and wrote in with pencil.
I
And
feel
then
that.
because I
I
need
love
to
that.
be able to look at that while I'm working on this, I don't need to go find a different file, I just need to flip through my papers, and, like, I would work on this while traveling and just have, like, my sheaf of secret papers that no one can see. And then I had, like, my
Awesome.
unfolding map of Ravenloft. It's gotten to where, like, the edges are, like, kind of worn soft because I folded and unfolded it so much. But I already had all the books. Although it was pretty funny, I had to keep this book secret as one does with so many IP books. And my children are teenagers now, and they're quite clever. But, as
Mm.
an adult, you never think that your children notice anything that you're doing. Like, I never cared what my parents were doing. Then one day my daughter was like, "Where is Curse of Strahd? I need to run a campaign." And I was like, "Oh, I have it. You can't have it." And she was like, "Well, can I just have it?" And I was like, "No." And she was like, "Why can't I have it?" And I'm like, "Fine, take it." And then like we like kind of fought over it for a while, and that's sort of like, "Oh, you're at school? Yoink. Oh, you took it to your bedside? Yoink." And then finally she was like, "Wait, what are you doing?"
That's too funny. Did she
Yeah.
did she find like post-it notes on special pages and stuff, or did you kind of keep it clean?
All of my Post-it notes were in the Ravenloft book, not in Curse of
Okay.
Strahd, so
Awesome. Awesome.
yeah, because it originally we played around with the different worlds and which ones to use in the story, so I've got lots of little tabs for all the different worlds that we
Yeah, yeah. Well,
considered.
I've heard really good things about that Ravenloft like campaign. No, what is it? Like a setting book?
Yes.
Van Richter, is it the Van Richter
And
one?
Richten's Guide to
Yeah, that's it.
I can see it, but it's facing the wrong way, but it's on the floor over there.
No, that's a really good resource for anybody listening who's thinking of running Curse of Strahd or even just running any game in any of the planes within Ravenloft. I think one of the domains rather.
Yeah.
Really solid book. And now, and we're going to talk some more about Ravenloft and running games in Ravenloft and Barovia and any of the other domains within Ravenloft, and maybe some advice too about running Curse of Strahd. Of course, Delilah, stick to what the advice that suits you. I'm gonna kind of read off a handful of various pieces of advice that I found on the internet for people looking to get better at running games kind of in Ravenloft or running Curse of Strahd. And I'd love to hear kind of your candid reaction to how that applies to telling stories generally or playing D&D. Whichever end of that spectrum you want to go to, feel free to jump in there. So the first piece of advice comes from an article on thegamer.com. And this article, of course, I'm condensing a long article into a couple of sentences, so take that for what it's worth, folks listening. But this article on the Gamer stresses that there's a lot of importance in establishing the right horror genre for your table, trying to set the tone to match the playstyle of the people playing and to manage their expectations. It recommends that you do research on the types of horror to help you establish that understanding for yourself if you're not too familiar with, the genres of horror, and then kind of making a decision and sticking to it. How do you feel about that advice as kind of like a first piece of advice, Delilah?
Oh, 100%. People don't wanna come in thinking that they're getting like a kind of gothic Jane Eyre sweeping vampires on the moor sort of thing and end up with like a body horror
Mm-hmm.
thing. They kind of want to know what to expect so that they can settle in and enjoy the story and not suddenly have that overwhelming kind of like trickly uncomfortable feeling of like, oh, I don't really like this game. I don't really want to play this game. I know the book also it's talking about running a campaign. It says that because of the unique nature of horror, it's good to talk to your players first and be like, "Do you have any red flags? Do you have
Mm-hmm.
any things that we need to avoid, any topics, any triggers, stuff like that to make sure that, you're serving them and making sure that they have a good time and aren't being comfortable, being
Yeah, definitely.
uncomfortable."
Totally. Session zero, doing some like lines and veils or something like this, where you kind of set up the red flags, is always something that we recommend in like all contexts. I think especially in the horror context, right? Because
Yeah.
it was a little while ago, but I had the creator of 10 Candles, Stephen Dewey, join me on the show, and 10 Candles is a fantastic horror game. Like it's a fantastic one shot horror system. And I think he said it best, where he said, coming up with the things you can't do doesn't actually prevent it from being very horrific. It actually helps you make it horrific, because now you know where you can go full ham. Like, what types of things can we really just go absolutely bonkers with? So anyhow, I that's fantastic advice, Delilah. Definitely, definitely. Um, I'll also kind of like loop back to what we were saying before. The beauty of Ravenloft is that you have these different domains, right? So you can kind of pick and choose the ones that suit. If people want like a weird western with aliens or whatever, well, you could
Mhm.
probably find that. Or if you want a more Frankenstein cyberpunk story, you can have that too. So definitely some value there. Awesome. The next piece of advice, this one is from an article on eventyr.com. And this article provides, specifically, this is advice for running games of Curse of Strahd. They say that in their experience, the biggest challenge in running this adventure is getting the players to care about the fate of Barovia and its citizens. They find that getting that buy-in, if you don't do it like out of the table and just to say, hey, you have to care about this stuff, it's kind of hard to get the characters motivated. So I'd love to actually hear what you would like to do if you were playing in a game of Curse of Strahd, Delilah, or even what did you do in Heir of Strahd to kind of make the characters care about the fate of the folks around you, and then maybe I'll chime back in with my thoughts.
I think the answer to both is you have to make it very personal and make the stakes, very, you know, what does they say? It's like, when one person dies, it's a tragedy. When a million people die, it's a statistic. It's really
Mm.
hard to really care about a lot of things at once, especially, you don't, yeah, I don't know these people. And like, we already know that kind of the NPCs of Barovia, like some of them don't even have souls. Like, they're not
Yeah,
even real people. It says so right in the manual when you're like, oh, you made your people not even people.
yeah,
Um,
it's hard to care about people that are just like husks in the first place. But yes,
but you're able to, whether, like, if I was a game master right now trying to come up with that, I'd be like, "Oh, maybe they meet a child in the woods, whose mother was taken, or a mother in the woods whose child was taken up to the carried away by a wolf to the castle." And then you're like, "Oh, well, now we have to help this mother and save this child," which is a lot different from, "Whoa, woe into Barovia, Strahd is cruel."
mm-hmm,
Or,
mm-hmm.
maybe he's poisoned the well of a village and people are dying. And one of those characters saves your character's life when they're fighting off a zombie in the middle of the forest. But it's the same thing we say with, books and scripts. We have that save the cat where, you know, helping an animal or a person in need that's a very specific person rather than a blanket number of people is a very personal thing. You get attached to someone and then you want to care about them. So you just have to figure out a way to make your characters care, um, in a smaller stakes. They can then expand, but you're never gonna get them with just "Woe is Barovia." All
Yeah,
of these
that's fantastic
soulless
to hear.
people in their gray jackets.
Absolutely. I like that expression. I've never heard that before. Save the cat. Find the cat for your players. There is almost definitely one for that'll strike a couple of people at the table for sure.
I
Um,
think also it's got the built-in, like, the tragedy of Tatiana, of, this woman that Strahd is trying to get in every life. It plays a big part in lots of the campaigns, and just that she is reincarnated, or Strahd thinks he is, or maybe you're playing when she's still alive, but she is a woman that, he kinda chased to death.
yeah, absolutely. I've actually I think it might have been in that piece in that article. At some point they suggest perhaps even having like flashback scenes, or like have one session of your adventure be one of these like flashback moments, and get your players to play like get one person to play Tatiana, or or even any of the other kind of more important recurring NPCs that happen in the game,
Yeah.
in the campaign book. If you can make your players live those experiences and then like yoink them out of it, the maybe the characters won't care, but the players will care, and then
Yeah,
by virtue they'll make their characters care about it.
yeah.
Yeah, fantastic advice. All right, I've got two more, I think, maybe three. Now my screen is freezing. There you go, two more. um, this one is from Open Heart Games, and Open Heart Games suggests that when you're running a game of Curse of Strahd, that the start of the game is significantly more deadly, like mechanically, than the end of the game. And this might just be kind of like how D&D is for the most part. Like level 1s through 3, the characters are very squishy.
Yeah.
Um, and they're just kind of at risk of dying a lot more. So they suggest that when you're playing Curse of Strahd in particular, to either start them at a higher level, so just immediately start them at like level 2, 3, and then maybe they kind of walk through the first couple of encounters, but it's better than them dying right off the
Yeah.
gate. Uh, or just providing them with a lot of like healing equipment or more opportunities to rest. I'd love to know, Delilah, how you feel about that advice in the context of like trying to generate a sense of horror. How does that kind of how do you balance that sense of horror with making the game fun and playable for people?
Well, I mean, I would want them to start as, I feel like there's value in starting at a lower level than being like, "You've already got everything you need. Have fun. Like you haven't earned
Mhm.
anything." So I would start them, maybe not at level 1, but level 2 or 3, which is how most of my characters start here. But as the DM, as you are choosing the encounters, you probably don't want to send them up against like a lich in their first thing. Like you're
Definitely.
looking at, the forest of Barovia, like there are dire wolves and then there are regular wolves. So maybe they face like a wounded regular wolf, but you can kind of like start feeding them smaller things to build up their confidence and their XP. And especially if this group hasn't played together before, then they may not have their timing down.
Mhm.
Um, my group definitely doesn't. I did have some issues in our first fight where I didn't have a really good healer. But I had an artificer who had some healing potions and who had some mending. So you kind of have to get creative if your characters naturally don't want a good healer. But honestly, you really shouldn't go into Barovia without some good healers and like a cleric or a paladin, someone who's going to call upon the gods to
Yeah,
give you some
yeah.
help.
Turn some
Um,
undead and detect evil and all that good stuff.
yeah, but I mean, there's lower level stuff there. Like maybe they find a Grimishka first. It doesn't have to be
Mm,
something super crazy.
yeah, yeah, I
So
like that
yeah, I would
advice.
just be careful as it's like you don't start feeding a baby a ribeye steak. You start with mush. So start
Totally.
feeding them mush.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. And I mean, I'd kind of tap into that too, right? I think the beauty of the Curse of Strahd is kind of this teetering on the brink. And I'm sure a lot of people listening are going to be mad at me to even suggest that you do this. But, if you got to fudge some dice to make the brink happen, that's what I would suggest doing, right?
Oh, you know
If
what
you,
else?
oh, go for it.
Okay, we got my little buddy here. We got to trust him. If you throw in like a pet that can help you fight, that's
Ooh,
kind of some
cool.
extra hit points that can help too.
Yeah, and then you can have a tragic end to the pet that
No,
everybody
we
gets.
would save the cat, not kill the cat.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Awesome. I have one last piece of advice. This one came from the Digital Raven Games blog post, and this one is specifically about Strahd and role playing Strahd and interacting with Strahd. And I don't want to spoil too much for people listening, but Strahd is a very nuanced character with a lot of layers to them, and they suggest two things. The first is try to make your players meet Strahd as often as possible, like in a lot of different moments, so that you can kind of showcase the progression of a variety of Strahd's kind of layers. Um, And they kind of suggest starting off with Strahd the statesman, the baron, if you will, and then slowly working your way, from like Tyrion Lannister into a more powerful wizard type character, and then into the kind of vampire and final form of what Strahd is. I'd love to know what your thoughts are, and if you kind of agree or disagree with that advice, Delilah, and also just more broadly speaking, how you would recommend folks kind of role play and present Strahd in their games to kind of maximize the impact of his character.
So Strahd is a very complex, deep character with a history and objectives. And a lovely thing that's built into his character is that he has a main goal as the Dark Lord of his domain, which is that he wants to find Tatiana, his lost love, whether the original one or a reincarnated version of her, or he wants to find an heir, hence the title of the book, or someone to rule with or to replace. And
Mhm.
because this is what he's looking for is inside a person walking around, whenever someone new comes to Barovia, he is kind of like very intrigued. And so he's not going to approach them and grab them by the collar and be like, "Are you she?" Like it's not he's a
Mhm.
subtle dude. So he's testing the characters to discover what he wants to know. So he is first going to approach as I'm just a rich human and I welcome you
Mhm.
and we're just doing fine and having a nice time. Like he usually meets people as a, you know, benevolent ruler of this land. Um, and then as things progress, depending on what he sees or doesn't see, how deep he can get, what he can get from them, he starts playing with people like a cat. Um, but that's part of the fun of Strahd is, he's essentially this unknowable character and an unreliable character. So there's a lot of playing with characters and the DM playing with what they need Strahd to do. And he also has a lot of minions around the castle where,
Mhm.
if maybe Strahd was coming down a little too hard or if things were progressing too fast, he might get called away on business. And then the other minions in the castle might take up, playing with the people in the castle. So there's a lot of richness in there for, approach and pull back. Because if you try to beat him when you're like a level 3 and you've just watched into his castle, he's going to squash you under his fist like a fly, and you're not going to
Yeah,
live.
absolutely. And I'd say that even on the flip side of that, he's a very smart character, extremely smart character. So if he starts to notice that the heroes are getting too powerful, he can kind of foresee that, and he can kind of step in and make sure that, you know, offers them some kind of deal or something. So
Yeah.
definitely, I think you can kind of play it both ways, right? I
He
really
can
like that.
threaten you, he can weaken you, he can send his minions after you, he can send you to places in the castle that are gonna cause you active harm. But then there's also ways to enrage him. There are specific things in the books that tell you, if Strahd sees or hears this, he's going to become enraged, and that's when he's stupid. So it's very fun to let characters kind of realize this.
Yeah, definitely. Did you do any of that in the book that you can share?
I mean, if I'm talking about it, I've probably read into it pretty deeply, so one can draw some conclusions. I mean, the you can't beat Strahd with brute force. You have to use the things in the castle and his history and what he wants and all those things against him. So it is a complex thing to go up against him, and anyone, you know, the DM is going to release little tidbits of information as necessary, and depending on what you find in the castle and what they want you to find. But I definitely used to the best of my abilities everything in that book that I found. I was like, "Ooh, that's fun."
Cool. Very cool. Awesome. So that kind of goes over the pieces of advice that I could find scouring the internet. So we're kind of finding our way to the end of the show. Before we kind of say goodbye and do a wrap up, Delilah, I'd love to throw the microphone back over to you to kind of hear any final thoughts that you have, or final pieces of advice that we didn't get to touch on as it pertains to telling stories in Ravenloft. And then, of course, I'd also love to kind of offer you the opportunity again to talk to us about your book, when it comes out, where people can find it, and all of that good stuff, and where they could follow you and find you on socials as well.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, Van Richten's guide has, all of the different worlds and Whoever is going to run the game, that's going to be your rich place to start looking for a world that has the flavor that you want, or that can be twisted to your desires. Work with your players to make sure everybody's on the same page as to what they want in a game and what they don't want. Um, Help them develop characters that are going to have the skills and resources that you need to survive in this world. Uh, this is not a world for a cinnamon roll bard necessarily. You've gotta give them some, the tools that they need to survive here, or at least encourage them to build characters that can work together as a team, um, and make sure that they have some good weapons too to get them through there, and if not, you're gonna have to kinda plant some around the castle
Mhm.
probably if they won't take the hint. But yeah, I think this is one of those worlds where it's a challenge and you want to help your players not be out to get them or one up them because you want them to have a good time and you're going to have creeping moments, moments that build to fear, moments that pull back with little mercy and whimsy. Someone is going to try to seduce some kind of door in this castle at some time or other, and that is fine. But yeah, just have fun with it and use the wealth of information in all of these books because uh, it's just you get every single thing that's ever existed in D&D basically drawn into this setting, so there's just so much room to play with and you should enjoy it as widely as you can.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as far as your book, The Heir of Strahd, can
Yes,
you tell us a little bit more about that and where folks can get it and stay tuned for updates, I suppose.
yes. So, Dungeons& and Dragons: Ravenloft, Heir of Strahd is out, next Tuesday, May 13th. It's available anywhere you get books. We love supporting those local indie bookshops. If they don't have it on the shelf, they can order it from you, or you can also order it at bookshop.org. There are some signed copies available. If you follow my socials, I'm at Delilah S. Dawson on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. I will, post links to that sort of thing. I believe it might be Forbidden Planet in the UK now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, there are some signed copies out there with book plates I did. Um, right now there is an excerpt up at the Nerdist. If you're into that, you can go read an excerpt of it. But yeah, it's a super fun book that is meant for both people that are very new to Ravenloft and have never even heard of it before, but are familiar with the existence of D&D. But if you are an old school Christy Golden fan who was down with Vampires in the Mist and who likes several of her characters, you're going to see them or echoes of them showing up. This is a book that definitely pays homage to what's come before with honor, and treats Strahd like the absolute monster he is. And the characters are a lot of fun and have heart and become a found family. And also, it's probably like PG-13. So I would give this to a 13 or 14-year-old who likes to read this kind of stuff. There's the usual level of D&D violence, and then a little bit more horror than usual, but no, I don't think anything else that would, get people really upset. Lots of death, obviously, because we're in Ravenloft. But yeah, it's just a
Yeah.
really fun book. I really hope people like it. I had so much fun writing it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure anybody who's listening to us talk about this right now, this is definitely up their alley. So I hope that folks go check it out. I'll have a link to Delilah's socials in the show notes for today's episode. This is going to come out not too far away from the release of the book. I think I'm planning for this to come out on Tuesday the 13th, which I think is the day
Oh,
you said
perfect.
this comes out. Yeah,
That is the
so
day.
if you're listening to this as it comes out
Uh-huh.
live, the book is coming out today, and if you're kind of a little bit slow on the draw, the book is already out. So please make
Uh-huh.
sure that you go take a look at your local bookstore and take a look at Ravenloft Heir of Strahd. I'll do what I can to link that up as well in the show notes.
Also, so like I said, I'm on Instagram and Blue Sky and Threads, but I used to be really big on Twitter when Twitter was a different place, and I kind of have this thing where if you have an ungoogleable question about writing or publishing, or if you have a question about one of my books, if you ask me, I'll do my best to answer you. So don't be like, Delilah, how do I write for D&D? Because I'll be like, oh my God, this is a very long conversation. But if you say like, what was this thing in your book? Or if you have a question about the book or about writing in general, like I'm usually pretty happy to answer those on social. I'll talk back to you.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, no, I know the downfall of Twitter was a real shame. It definitely spread apart the all kinds of communities, right? Trying to find what the next place was going to be. But I
Yeah.
think Blue Sky is doing a good job. Blue Sky and Threads, between the two of them, you kind of have what you need. But yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Delilah, for being here on Roleplay Chat to talk to us all about your new book and to talk to us about, Ravenloft and giving us some words of wisdom. Did you have any last thoughts to share with the audience before we say goodbye?
Just I hope everybody goes out there and gets into Ravenloft and runs some games and has a wonderful time. I can't think of anything better than people reading the book and then wanting to go share the absolute terror of Strahd von Zarovich with all of their friends.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Delilah, and I hope you get the opportunity to run a one shot or something with your characters from your book. I think that would be
That
super
would be
fun.
super fun.
I'd love to know all about it. All right,
Yeah,
bye
thanks for having
everybody.
me. Bye.
Yeah, my pleasure. Bye everyone. Let's call it a chat. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of today's episode, friends. If you made it all the way here, you are one of the true MVPs of the Roleplay Chat audience. The other MVPs of the Roleplay Chat audience are the Patreon subscribers who are supporting me through their subscription on Patreon. I'd like to thank Domil's Wondrous Works and Jason over at Shadowmane. Thanks to the two of you for supporting me. Your support allows me to continue to make this show. If you wanted to join them, you're welcome to do so by going onto Patreon and looking for Roleplay Chat. There's also a link down in the show notes. There you can subscribe to the show where you can get access to the episodes as soon as they're done, as well as extended episodes depending on the tier that you subscribe to. You can also support the show without spending money. You can do that by reviewing the show, spreading the good word, and sharing the show with your friends. If you do that, it really helps to broaden the reach of Roleplay Chat. Recommendations, personal recommendations, and word of mouth really are one of the number one ways for the podcast to be discovered. Also, if you're looking to buy some new tabletop RPG stuff, like dice, miniatures, or new games and rules and supplements, the show notes have links to affiliate links. So if you were to buy things using those affiliate links, for instance, the indie showcase that was spotlighted in today's episode, you can purchase it there, sometimes at a discount too, depending on the link, and a small kickback comes back to me. So yeah, check all that stuff out. The show notes has a handful of links there, things like Hero Forge, Drive-Thru RPG, some awesome dice makers and things of that nature. So go check it out, and yeah, thanks again for making it all the way here. And one last thank you to Alex and Chase over at Pocket Bard for allowing me to use their music for the intro and outro of Roleplay Chat.